Have you ever noticed how in any room, the smartest people are usually the quietest, while the loudest voices control the conversation? You might think that's just human nature, but here's what terrifies me. It's not a personality quirk. It's a symptom of a civilizational cycle that's been repeating for thousands of years. Every great civilization reaches a point where intelligence becomes unpopular and ignorance becomes socially acceptable. We're not just watching this happen. We're living inside the final act of this cycle right now. The question is, can you see the pattern before it's too late? There's a reason societies can't see their own decline. It's called the normalization of deviance. When absurdity becomes normal through gradual exposure, your brain stops registering it as a threat. In 1453, Byzantine scholars debated the gender of angels, while Ottoman canons positioned outside Constantinople's walls. They weren't stupid. They were systematically blind to their existential crisis. The Soviet Union's economists reported growth statistics, while store shelves sat empty for years. The Aztec Empire sacrificed thousands annually, believing it would prevent collapse, even as their infrastructure crumbled. In each case, society was so immersed in its belief system that obvious signs of catastrophe became invisible. We're doing the exact same thing. We scroll TikTok during a climate crisis. We debate pronouns on Twitter, while democratic institutions erode. We pour billions into cryptocurrency as basic infrastructure decays. This isn't stupidity. It's something far more dangerous. It's the psychological phenomenon Daniel Comingm called systematic blindness. Our brains are wired to protect our worldview, not to perceive reality accurately. Fish don't feel the water they swim in. Civilizations don't feel the absurdity they're drowning in. The pattern repeats because the blindness is built into human psychology itself. So when exactly does a civilization cross the point of no return? In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch discovered something chilling about human nature. He showed people two lines, one obviously longer than the other, and asked which was longer. When actors in the room confidently chose the wrong answer, 75% of real participants agreed with the obvious lie. This wasn't weakness. This was evolution. For millions of years, belonging to the group mattered more than being correct. Isolation meant death. Conformity meant survival. But what helped our ancestors survive in African savannas is now destroying our civilizations. When a society reaches critical mass of people choosing social approval over truth, the process becomes irreversible. Today's algorithms amplify this effect by 10 to 100 times. We're not just conforming to the people in our room. We're conforming to millions in our digital tribes. Every like, every share, every retweet trains us to value consensus over accuracy. Here's an uncomfortable question for you. When was the last time you expressed an opinion that could cost you friends? If your answer is never or you can't remember, you're already part of the problem. The point of no return isn't when institutions fail. It's when individuals stop valuing truth over belonging. That moment might have already passed. After analyzing the fall of 47 major civilizations, historian Carroll Quigley identified an undeniable pattern in his work The Evolution of Civilizations. Every collapse follows three distinct stages. Stage 1 is the inversion of values. Society begins rewarding what it once condemned and condemning what it once honored. Expertise becomes elitism. Nuance becomes weakness. Immediate gratification becomes authentic living. The very qualities that built the civilization become socially unacceptable. Stage 2 is the weaponization of ignorance. Not knowing transforms from a gap in knowledge into an identity. It becomes a badge of honor, a political statement, a mark of authenticity. People start taking pride in what they don't know because it makes them real and relatable. The phrase "I don't need experts, I have common sense" becomes a rallying cry. Stage 3 is the most dangerous, the celebration of decline. Society doesn't just accept its degradation, it romanticizes it, calls it authenticity, frames it as freedom from elitism or a return to simplicity. This is when a doctor becomes less authoritative than an influencer with 1 million followers, when peer-reviewed research loses to a viral video, when careful analysis is mocked as overthinking. Most civilizations never realize which stage they're in until it's far too late. The Romans didn't know they were in stage 3. The Maya didn't recognize the pattern. Here's what should keep you awake at night. Which stage do you think we're in right now? And more importantly, what are you doing about it? Let me show you how value inversion actually works in practice. In the late Roman Empire, military service transformed from the highest honor into a burden citizens desperately avoided. Romans who once competed for the privilege of defending their civilization began hiring barbarian mercenaries to fight their wars, not because they couldn't fight, because they no longer valued what made them strong. In China's Song dynasty, the warrior class became despised, while bureaucrats who wrote beautiful poetry were elevated to power. The empire had extraordinary culture and literature. It also had a military so weak that Mongol horsemen conquered them in decades. When the invasion came, poets couldn't organize defense. In Germany's Weimar Republic, intellectual discourse in the Reichstag became a subject of mockery. Complex parliamentary debates were dismissed as weakness. Simple slogans about restoring greatness gained power. We know how that ended. Plato predicted this pattern 2,400 years ago in the Republic. He wrote that democracy contains the seeds of its own destruction, because it inevitably leads to a situation where the loudest and most popular, not the wisest, make decisions. Today, we see the symptoms everywhere if you're willing to look. Expertise is dismissed as arrogance. Complex thinking is labeled overthinking. Caution is framed as fear. Impulsivity is celebrated as authentic leadership. Scientists are told to stay in their lane. Doctors are contradicted by Facebook posts. Educators are accused of indoctrination for teaching critical thinking. Can you name a single virtue your grandparents' generation valued that isn't now dismissed as weakness? Patience, humility, delayed gratification, respect for earned authority, careful deliberation before action. Every one of these has been culturally inverted. We now celebrate their opposites. Speed over patience, confidence over humility, instant gratification over long-term thinking, distrust of authority over respect for earned expertise, quick reactions over careful thought. This isn't progress. It's stage 1 of civilizational collapse. The terrifying part is how normal it feels. Stage 2 is where not knowing becomes an identity. The Dunning-Kruger effect shows that people with the least knowledge have the greatest confidence. But that's only half the picture. In 2014, psychologist David Dunning discovered something more disturbing. In the internet age, this effect amplifies. People confuse access to information with understanding of information. Googling something becomes equivalent to studying it 4 years. The phrase "I did my own research" now means I found a YouTube video confirming what I already believed. History shows us where this leads. During China's Cultural Revolution, wearing glasses could get you killed. They were a symbol of education, therefore bourgeois, therefore enemy. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia murdered people for looking too intelligent. This isn't ancient history or foreign aberration. It's a pattern. When society begins perceiving education as a threat, ignorance automatically becomes a form of resistance. Look at contemporary politics. Candidates brag about not being politicians and not being experts, as if inexperience is a qualification. The phrase coastal elites became an insult for people with education. Real Americans are defined in opposition to expertise. Anti-intellectualism isn't accidental. It's weaponized. Consider the phenomenon of do your own research. It sounds empowering. In practice, it means rejecting institutional knowledge in favor of confirmation bias. Medical research conducted by thousands of PhDs over decades is dismissed because someone's uncle shared a Facebook post. Climate science backed by 97% of experts is rejected because a blogger said otherwise. This isn't skepticism. Skepticism questions everything including itself. This is certainty disguised as skepticism. Here's an uncomfortable question for you. How many times in the last month have you expressed strong opinions about topics you don't actually understand? If you're being honest, the answer is probably many. We all do it. Social media rewards confident ignorance more than careful uncertainty. Every time you share without reading, comment without understanding, or speak with certainty about complexity, you're participating in stage 2. The question isn't whether you do this. The question is whether you'll admit it and change it. The most dangerous stage isn't when civilization falls, but when it begins romanticizing its own fall. Venice transformed from the most powerful trading republic in history into an open-air museum. Rather than recognize decline, Venetians began celebrating it as preserving authenticity. Detroit went from America's industrial heart to a symbol of urban decay. Instead of acknowledging systemic failure, culture aestheticized the ruins as urban exploration and authentic grit. This isn't acceptance. This is celebration of deterioration. The boiling frog metaphor is usually told wrong. A frog will actually jump out if water heats gradually. But if you convince the frog that hot water is more authentic, more real, more natural, then it stays until the end. We see this in cultural narratives everywhere. Return to simplicity often means rejecting complex thinking. Street smarts are fetishized over formal education. Book learning becomes a dismissive term. Keeping it real means refusing nuance and complexity. Consider contemporary trends. Hustler culture is glamorized over systematic thinking. Building sustainable institutions is mocked as corporate. Long-term planning is dismissed as overthinking. Authenticity is celebrated. But authentic often just means unfiltered, the absence of a barrier between brain and mouth. Simple living gets romanticized, but frequently it's just rationalization for downward economic mobility. When was the last time you heard someone use the word wisdom non-ironically? Not life hacks, not tips and tricks, not what they don't want you to know. Actual wisdom. The concept has disappeared from our cultural vocabulary. We've replaced it with being real. Keeping it 100, no filter. These aren't equivalents. Wisdom implies earned understanding, careful consideration, integration of knowledge and experience. Being real just means saying whatever you think without processing it. Stage 3 is when a civilization stops aspiring to wisdom and starts celebrating its absence. When complexity becomes pretension, when expertise becomes elitism, when careful thought becomes overthinking. When we're there, decline isn't just accepted, it's the culture itself. Not every civilization dies. Some find ways to renew themselves. In 1853, Japan was a feudal society with swords and samurai. 40 years after the Meiji Restoration, it was an industrial power that defeated Russia in the 1905 war. How did this happen? Japanese leaders recognized a crisis and made painful choices. They sent thousands of young Japanese to study Western science, technology, military strategy. They didn't just copy. They adapted with deep respect for expertise. Singapore under Lee Kuan Yew did something even more radical. Zero tolerance for corruption. Mandatory English education. Meritocracy as state religion. In 30 years, Singapore transformed from a poor colony with no natural resources into one of the wealthiest societies on the planet. Post-war Germany faced a choice: fall into resentment or confront reality. They chose Vergangenheitsspult, the painful process of confronting the past. What do these three have in common? Each recognized a crisis. Each rejected comfortable narratives. Each trusted expertise. Each invested in long-term education. Each created institutions rewarding competence over popularity. Compare this to Argentina. In 1900, it was one of the world's wealthiest nations. A century of populist leaders promising easy solutions led to economic collapse. The difference wasn't resources or history. It was the choice between easy narratives and hard truths, between comfort and wisdom, between what people wanted to hear and what they needed to know. The pattern of renewal is as clear as the pattern of decline. The question is whether we have the courage to follow it. Civilizations don't fall abstractly. They fall through millions of individual decisions. Your decisions. Every day. Every time you share an article without reading it. Every time you express certainty about something you actually doubt. Every time you choose a comfortable echo chamber over uncomfortable truth. Here's a challenge. This week, Find the strongest argument against something you believe most deeply, not a strawman version. The best, smartest version of the opposing position. This is called steelmanning, and it's the antidote to idiocracy. Practice intellectual humility. Instead of I know, start saying based on what I understand. Instead of they're idiots, ask what might they see that I don't. Instead of it's obvious, acknowledge it's complex. This isn't weakness. This is precisely what separates wisdom from noise. Actively seek disconfirming evidence. If you believe X, search for the best arguments against X. If after that you still believe X, now it's an earned belief, not inherited certainty. Research from the University of Illinois 2019 shows that people who regularly engage with opposing viewpoints score 40% higher on critical thinking assessments, not because they change their minds constantly, but because their beliefs become more sophisticated, more nuanced, more accurate. Here's the direct question. Are you willing to appear less certain in order to be more correct? Are you willing to sacrifice social approval for intellectual honesty? Because that's the choice, and it's a choice you make dozens of times every single day. Remember at the beginning when I asked if you noticed how the smartest people stay quiet, while the loudest control the conversation. Now you know why. It's not a personality quirk, it's a symptom of a civilization in one of 3 stages of decline. But knowing this pattern gives you a choice. You can be like the Byzantines debating theology while siege towers approach the walls, or like the Meiji Japanese who made painful but necessary choices to modernize. History doesn't have a predetermined ending. Each civilization chooses its finale through the accumulated choices of millions of individuals. Your choices matter more than you think, not because you're special, but because you're not alone. Right now, thousands of people are watching this video, reading these words, facing the same choice. If a critical mass of us chooses wisdom over comfort, evidence over emotion, long-term thinking over immediate gratification, the pattern can be broken. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being slightly better tomorrow than today, slightly more willing to question yourself, slightly more open to being wrong, slightly more committed to truth over tribal loyalty. The final question isn't can our civilization survive? The final question is which type of person will you choose to be? The one who recognized the pattern and did nothing, or the one who recognized the pattern and decided it ends with them? Your answer to that question matters more than you'll ever know.